Okay. So today, what Andrew had a lesson plan, but I think he's going to go over his next week. But we're going to talk about history for Christ. We're going to build a case, historical case for Jesus Christ. Okay. Let me mute this person. Okay. So if you, I like the words that Andrew said the last time. When you look at the word history, it's his story, right? God's story. And God's story is a story about redemption, right? His love story for us. Um, in today's class, we can go over the historical defense for the case of Jesus Christ, right? So this is something that you can use for apologetics. So in apologetics, when you defend your faith, um, you can use different ways of defending the faith. In this one, we can use history, right? We're using history itself and connecting it with real life events or events that are written in in the history books. Okay, so we'll use that to defend a case for Jesus. But for Christians, for us, if you look at the big picture, to make it simple, Andrew mentioned this in the past too, that you can break down history into three separate major points, right? Three major acts. The first act, or the first chapter, right, of history is the Old Testament, okay? And the tone is an approach is from the Father's point of view, and you can see the writing of the Old Testament is about laws, prophecies, and promises, and punishment, right? Hope and punishment or judgment. And then Act 2 is the Son, right? When Jesus finally came, and the whole New Testament is dedicated for Jesus, right? And the good news. And then you have Act 3 after Jesus, right? After the temple was destroyed. This was the time of the Gentiles. And you can read about this in Romans 11, especially 25 to 26. Paul calls this period the fullness of the Gentiles, right? Until this is completed, then Jesus will return. And from that point to today, this is the works of the Holy Spirit, right? The acts of the Spirit in the church. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward if you look at it from this point of view, and it makes sense, right? Okay. And then on the other hand, you have man's story, right? Human history. Human history, you have historical events that are written by historians, right? Scholars, people who study history. They write down the events. And it's usually the scholars or historians of the winning side, right? Those who won. So the victors and those in power, they write the stories, but it's from man's point of view. So it's bias for the victors. So where does Jesus fit in? Well, Jesus and his life is, and his purpose, it's the intersection of the two stories. So Jesus Christ is the center, right, of God's story and man's story. So he combines the two. And if you look at both, Jesus Christ is the center of everything. Okay. So how do we go about combining the two? we do that by analyzing the prophecies of the Bible, and also analyzing that over the written historical events, right? And to see where, how did the two come together? Okay. So to do that, what are prophecies, right? So sometimes we question how and why does God give prophecies? A prophecy is a special revelation of future events that's usually in the form of visions that God reveals to the prophets, right? The major prophets, you have, Elijah. Oops, not, I misspelled that. That's Moses, not Jose. And then you have Daniel, Ezekiel, and others. So take that part out. And the purpose of the Old Testament prophecies are usually about hope and judgment. So my next question is, how does it work, and why does it always come true? Or, why can't we change prophecies, or we don't know about it until it happens, right? So in our Sunday school, for those who were there, we talked about this, how God, he exists inside and outside of time, right? And we know that time, when we look at the black hole and the laws of physics, time is actually something that can be manipulated, right? If you were at the event horizon of the black hole, time stops. Or if you go at the speed of light, if you can ever go at the speed of light, which is almost impossible, time just stops. So time is, in a way, it's relative, right? But for God, and time and space, they live within this universe. But if you look at God, he lives in and out of time. So he can see the end from the beginning, or anywhere in between, right? He can see all events of history at the same time, but not us, right? That's why no one can do prophecies. Even Satan are not, they don't have that gift of prophecy except through God, right? And God reveals these prophecies through prophets, right? Does that make sense? It's kind of difficult to comprehend since we're not God, right? But and that's why it's also true that when God gives a prophecy, it's very hard for us to change it because he knows what's going to happen. Okay? Or he may give us choices, but he knows the answer to those choices. So this comes into the that the Calvinist Arminian debate, but we're not going to get into that today. Okay. In the Old Testament, we have a lot of prophecies about the coming of Christ, of Jesus, right? So there are over 40 prophecies in the Old Testament. Some people can find over 50, 55. So the point is there's a lot of prophecies in the Bible, and especially about Jesus. We'll go over maybe two major ones, but I'm just giving you a few here. So let's start with Isaiah 52. And you can also see that it's quoted in Matthew 18:17, right? So if you look at Matthew chapter 8, verse 16 to 17. When evening came, many who were demon possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was fulfilled what was spoken through prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. So let's look at Isaiah 52, verse 13 to chapter 53, verse 12. Right? See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised up and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. So when Jesus was born, he was, from a, he was born in the manger. I mean, he was raised by poor parents, right? Joseph and Mary. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and before our suffering, yet we consider him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed, right? If you read this, it perfectly describes who Jesus was, what he had to go through, right? And remember, the Old Testament were written a few hundred years before Christ actually was crucified, okay? We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. So remember, he was crucified with thieves, right? Though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. And after he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. And by his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Before I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with strong. Before he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors, he bore the sin of many, right? Okay, so that's just the one of the prophecies, and like I said, it's amazing how accurate the life of Jesus was portrayed in this these chapters, right? In these verses. And you can see all these events, small and large, being written out in the Gospels. All right, so let's go to the next one. So this is Daniel's chapter 9, verse 20 to 27. I think Andrew mentioned this. he didn't have time to go over the calculations, but we're gonna, let's see, yeah, we're going to go over the verses and try to explain how the calculations work, right? The 77s that Daniel prophesied. Okay, so if you have your Bible, Daniel chapter 9, verse 20 to 27. So while I was speaking and praying, so this is Daniel. If you remember, he went through the Babylonian captivity, and also when the Persians also captured Babylon. So he went through different rulers, right? So this is during those times. So while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and sin of my people, Israel, and making my request to the Lord, my God, for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, remember the angel Gabriel, right? The man I had seen in the earlier vision came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler will come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolation have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. In the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So it's very difficult to understand this one, right? But let's break it down. So Passover in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. Remember, Passover is when Israel, it's a command or a practice that God instructed Israel to practice when he rescued Israel from Egypt, right? From slavery. And remember when the angel passed over the houses, if the houses that did not have the blood of the lamb painted over their door, the angel of death would come in and kill the firstborn son, right, of the house. So this was the time when, this is the Passover, right, of the some people say the angel of death, right, of the judgment. So this was a practice that was done on the first month of the Jewish calendar. Okay, the first month is called the Nisan. The Nisan is the first month of the Jewish calendar. In our calendar, because our calendar is different from the Jewish calendar, our calendar would be sometime around March or April of the year. So sometime around spring. And each year it's a little bit different, right? So the Jewish year has 360 days. In our calendar, we have 365.25 days, right? Because we have a leap year. It's 365 days, but every 4 years we skip a day in February, right? The end of February. So let's calculate this. So you have 7 sevens. You guys know your multiplication table? Trying to teach the kids this right now. So you have 7 7. Let me see if I can draw. 7 7 is 7 times 7, right? So each day represents a year. Okay, so you have 7 sevens, and then you have 62 sevens. So 7 times 7 is 49, and then you have 62 sevens. So 62 times 7 is 434 days, right? And since each day represents a year, you have 483 Jewish years. Okay, because the Jewish year is 360 days. Now, if we want to understand how many days in total, right? Because we have to convert that back to our calendar. So 360 days times 483 Jewish years will give you this, right? 173,880 days. Okay. Are you guys following? Sorry. I know some of us don't like math. So there was an order in history. This is written in historical books. If you look at the Persian emperors, there was one emperor by the name of Antarxis, right? And in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 1 to 8, remember Jeremiah was the cupbearer, right, for the king or the emperor. And so let me mute someone here. Okay. So he asked the king, and for to rebuild the temple, right? He wanted to come to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And this was not the time. I mean, there were several migrations, or there were several waves of Jews coming back to Jerusalem by this time. So it wasn't right after the exile. So the exile of the Jews were 70 years, right? So it ended around maybe 515 BC or something around there. So, but when Jeremiah came back to help rebuild the temple, it was around 445 or 444 BC. But in this case, if we look right to the date, this was done by someone else, but he pointed the date to be around 444 BC, March 14, right? That's when the order went out to rebuild the temple, for Jeremiah to come back to rebuild the temple. So if you look at 173,880, so that was the number of days, and divide that by the number of the Gregorian calendar, you have 476 years and 0.06 days, right? Okay, so let's look at the next one. Let me stop the annotation. Okay, so the next one here. Let me clear the annotation. Okay. So Psalm Sunday was on 8032 weekend. So every year, if you look at the Jewish calendar, you can pinpoint the Passover, right? And come up with the Psalm Sunday. So in 8032, Psalm Sunday would be April 6th. Okay. And this was when Jesus was welcomed as the anointed one by the Jews, right? So this is Matthew chapter 21. If you read that, Jesus, he asked his disciple to get him some, a donkey so he can ride in to fulfill Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, right? And then when he was riding into Jerusalem, the people shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So the crowd they in a way they anointed him, right? And this fulfills Psalms 118, 25, and 26. Now let's do the math. This gives us March 14th of 444 BC to April 6th of AD 32, right? 32 AD. So that's, if you subtract AD 32 from 444 BC, you get 476 years. And then the date of the order that went out to when Jesus was anointed was about 24 days. So that gives us, if you convert that to decimal, that's 476 years, that 0.06 days, right? And you multiply that by the Gregorian calendar, that gives us 173,880 days, right? So that's the same as 300 and, sorry, let me get you. Let's go back here. So that gives us the same as 483 Jewish years, or 173,880 days. So that's the calculation. Right down to the day. Okay. Any questions on that? It's pretty amazing, right? How exact the prophecies are, and especially when God gives the days. Let me remove that. Sorry, clear the annotation. But then we also have missing 7. So that was 69 sevens, okay? Because you only have, so if you look at the verse here, after 62 sevens, the anointed one would be put to death, right? So right on Good Friday, he was handed over to be crucified. Okay. So that's right after the 62 sevens. Note that the anointed one here is not the same as the word he will confirm, right? He in this verse. So at the end of Daniel's chapter 9, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. So the missing 7 is down here. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed and is poured out on him. So if you say he on this verse is the same as Jesus, then why would Jesus cause an abomination, right, on the altar, in the temple? It just doesn't make sense, right? Because this is not the same person. Jesus is not going to defile the temple, but this person, he is going to defile the temple. But because he is going to defile the temple, it also means that the temple needs to be built, right? So there's one missing 7, and this missing 7 is what we call the tribulation, or the end of times, right? When when the temple of Jerusalem in Jerusalem is rebuilt. Right now, there is no temple. Okay, so if you want to know when the Antichrist will come again, then you have to look at the signs and know that the temple must be rebuilt first before he can actually show his face. Okay, so this refers to the Antichrist, not this is not the same person as the anointed one. Okay, make sense? Let's see. Yeah, got time. There's another. Yeah, we can also look at another prophecy about numbers and history. And this one is in Ezekiel chapter 4. So in Ezekiel, God commanded Ezekiel to do the following, right? He told Ezekiel, you know, lie on your left side and put the sin of the people of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days, you will bear the sin of the people of Israel. After you finish this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the people of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each sin. Turn your face toward the siege of Israel, Jerusalem, and with bared arm prophesy against her. I will tie you up with ropes so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have finished the days of your siege. So what are these days, right? What are these numbers? Now this one is, the 390 days is a little bit difficult to interpret, as well as the 40 days, but there are theories, okay? So these are just theories. Don't take it like the final truth, but so many Bible scholars are saying the 390 days is probably the number of years when Solomon's king Rehoboam became king until the Babylonian captivity, right? So 390 years of reign, right? So remember what happened after Solomon died. His son became king, but after his son became king, after his Rehoboam became king, the other 10 tribes of Israel, they rebelled, right? And they let me mute. So after he became king, the other tribes, they rebelled, and then the kingdom split into two. So God appointed Solomon's son the king, but then the rest of Israel, they did not acknowledge the rightful king, right? So some scholars are saying because of their sin not to recognize who God chose, they 390 years were was the time of God gave them mercy for 390 years until the judgment, right? So they sinned, and then judgment came at the end of the 390 years. But there's also another judgment for Judah. So 40 days, so 40 years. So this is what some would say when Jesus started his ministry in 30 AD, right? The Pharisees and most of the Jews did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. They did not see him as their king or their Messiah, right? So after Jesus came to Jerusalem, after he rode in a donkey, right, he made another prophecy, right? he said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, not one stone would be on top of another for the temple, right? He prophesied that the temple would be destroyed again. Now, if you look at the time from when his ministry started until the temple was eventually destroyed by the Romans, so in AD 70, the Jews they had another rebellion, right? Because they were tired of paying taxes, and the Roman governors or the officials that were in charge of Israel region, they had very little respect for the Jews, or they didn't understand their culture. So the Jews were really upset and unhappy. So they had a rebellion against the Romans in AD 70. And then the emperor said, you know what, just let's make an example of them. And the Romans destroyed the temple in AD 70. Until today, it has not been rebuilt. Okay. But because the Jews failed to, or Israel, they failed to recognize Jesus as King of Kings. They had 40 years compared to 390 years, right? It was very swift, right? Compared to God's timing. They had 40 years from the time of their sin until judgment came. And ever since then, the Jews have not rebuilt the temple. Okay? But it was because they did not recognize Christ as king. I think that ends this. Let me stop the YouTube.